Hey, it's Mosquito, also known as Chris. Welcome to the shop. Do you wish that your dovetails looked like this every time? Me too. Keep practicing. I can't help you there. But what I can help you with is making a saw for those dovetails. This Gents Saw, specifically. That way, you'll have something to look forward to practicing with. Stick around and we will jump into it. This is a Foley, I think it's a 385 retoother. 385, yep. Got a little die punch set here, and as this spins, it'll just stamp those teeth in, and then this little pawl you set up on ratchet bar, and that'll move it by whatever you set. And then there's two little screws here on either side, and there's a scale on this end, and that's how you set to get your tooth angle. They have what's called a carrier bar, a ratchet bar, and then your saw plate. The ratchet bar goes onto the carrier bar, and then on the back side of the carrier bar is where you clamp your saw plate. So this is 2.5 by 12, and what I need is actually going to only end up being 8 inches, but as you can see, you kind of need about 11 inches in order to fit in between these two things. To figure out how high this is supposed to be from here, there's a gauge that comes with these machines when they were new, which I don't have, but I've created a digital copy, and so for me it's 0.711 inches for 16 points per inch, which is what I'm doing, and it changes based on the size of the teeth, so it's going to stick up a little bit further if you're cutting larger teeth. So anyway, you'll have to look that up. I found it on vintagemachinery.org. They had measured drawings of what that gauge would be, so if you make one for yourself, you certainly could. This slides right in. There's a pair of guides on either side, or I guess a pair of guides. There's one on either side. Basically, it just slides into that. Flip up your little pawl here. So what I do is I make sure that my punch die is all the way down, and then with the pawl disengaged, I basically run it up right up next to that die. I back it up somewhere around 3 to 5. So there I'm all the way up against it. And then I pull it back a couple right there, and then I just run it by hand to make sure that this is advancing. Each one of these bars has numbers stamped in it, and this one is 16 and 8.5. So basically you skip one to get your 8.5, and you hit every single one for your 16. So we're going to be hitting every single one. That's going to give us 16. If you need to adjust that pawl, the travel of it, this little knob will do that, so it'll change where it sits. I am going to plug it in. Now we turn it on, and it's just going to feed itself all the way through, and once we're done cutting the plate, we can shut it off and take it out of there. All right, then you flip up your pawl, and then we slide it out. I usually go out the other end just because then I don't have to try to make sure the die is out of the way and run the plate through it again, but easy enough. There you can see our freshly toothed saw. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. If you had a shear, that'd be the easiest. So if you just had a metal shear, you could just right there. If you have a Dremel, you could do that. You can cut all the way through it. Or if you have like a grinder with a cutoff disc, you don't actually have to cut all the way through. So you can score it. And then if you have a straight line to kind of snap it against, kind of like you would glass, you can do that. So you can score it, snap it. I'm just going to use a hacksaw, which isn't ideal. I prefer kind of the score it and snap it method, but that's loud and sparks, and I'd have to clean up a bunch. So I'm going to go at it with the hacksaw just to kind of show that it can be done. Again, I've got my line marked straight down, and we'll clean it up with a file when we're done. There we go. This is 1095 blue tempered spring steel. What I'm using is 0.015 inches. And that's pretty thin, but this is intended to be a Gents saw for dovetails, and a lot of times those are pretty thin plates. So that's what I'm doing. The question is, where did this come from? So this is from Online Metals. So you can either buy a whole roll of it, 8 feet or whatever it is. They also give you the option to have them cut to size. So that's what I did. It's a little bit more expensive than buying a big sheet and cutting them down yourself. So the only thing that I had to do for this project, obviously, was cut it down to length. The height was already what I wanted, and the length was pretty close to what I wanted. It worked out pretty well for that. It helps get over a lot of the prep stuff, which it was a couple of bucks extra having them cut to size versus just getting the raw sheet, but it just kind of speeds things up a little bit and makes it a little bit easier. If you can get somebody else to cut it for you, well, not a bad deal. There's the saw plate. It's got the teeth in it. It's the right size. So the next thing is we will get rid of that bluing, and then we will work on putting an etch on it probably. So this is just a little plastic tub, and I have some white vinegar in there with a little bit of salt mixed in. Kind of just gonna allow us to clean that off without having to necessarily sand through all of it. So here you can see that difference, maybe, between the part that I was just doing with the Scotch-Brite and the part that I didn't. So basically, gonna do that all the way around the plate, get it all cleaned up, and then we will head back out to the shop. Just got some WD-40 to kind of help lubricate a little bit to keep my sandpaper fresh a little bit longer. And we're just gonna start with 400 and see if we can't get this thing all cleaned up. So I've wiped the plate off with some acetone, and I'm just gonna hit it with some protective enamel. This is satin Rust-Oleum black. And the reason I do that is because I'm going to use my diode laser. And what I do with the diode laser is basically just burn away where I want my etch to be, and then we go inside and etch it. Lots of back and forth with all this stuff. Kind of wish I had running water in the shop. It's set up in the diode laser, basically. I'm just gonna burn the paint away. Kind of noisy, not very exciting. Lid's closed, so we'll check back when it's done. All right, so I'm not gonna lie to you. I may have overcooked it. Not 100% sure, but that looks a lot deeper and a little different than what I did last time. There's a little bit of weird, like you can kind of see it, probably not here, but you can see a little bit of it on the other side. So I'm thinking I'm just gonna take some acetone, clean this off, and then see what we're at. And if it sucks, I guess we pitch this one, make a new one. Sound good? I don't know why I'm asking. I'm gonna do it anyway. That looks really cool with the paint in it. I mean, I'm scrubbing on it pretty good and it's not coming out, so. WD-40, and this time I'm using red Scotch-Brite. And it seems to be hanging in there. I'm gonna see if I can clean that out just a hair. That's more the etch I was expecting to get. Now I'm gonna go back and polish up with the, well, I guess not really polish up, but sand up with the 400 grit just to kind of smooth everything out again. All right, so not exactly sure what happened that first time, but there we go. That is a pretty good etch. And this one, so this was a much thinner steel than I used for the other one. In fact, it was almost half as thick. And so maybe that's me chickening out on that etch, but I kind of felt like once I saw it, I just felt like I didn't want to push my luck and try etching because I was afraid that I was going to go through or something or make it so thin that it was basically foil. But I almost think I got enough heat into it with the laser that it might have just changed the color for tempering, because it was stuck out there and it did not come off with the acetone, so I don't think it was just paint. I might have to do some experimenting with that because that was actually kind of cool. I guess with that we can move on to the next step. So here I've got the brass stock. This is 1/2 inch leg, 16-inch thick angle, and I've got it in between some steel angle here in my bench vise, and that steel angle I'm experimenting with just to see if I can kind of squish it all together a little bit more uniformly. When I did the mini one, by the way, check out the mini back saw for my son if you haven't already seen that one. When I did that one, I kind of just used the vise jaws, but here I'm trying to use that angle to try to get the whole thing in one shot and to not have the same kind of steps that I had where I kind of squished half of it and then the other half, and I had to work out some stuff. But Here I'm kind of going back in to do the ends separately just because they didn't quite get squished as much because there's nothing squeezing the angle iron out that far. So if I do this again, I probably would skip heating it in those because I think they act as a heat sink and they don't really do a very good job of heating the brass up very quickly. But got the job done. After that, I do the same thing. I take a file, and this one was bought specifically for brass, so it's a little bit different tooth profile, but just taking off that corner from the angle and then kind of rounding out that front, I guess, toe of the spine. And then, yeah, a little bit rough, but there's our spine. I've got my brass back up here in the vise. And what I'm going to do is file down one part of this a little bit. So basically, the saw plate will go roughly there, and I want a little section that's slightly smaller just because that'll end up going into the handle. Important things, make sure your teeth are facing the right way. So in this case, because they're filed rip, it basically straight up slopes down towards the back. Try to work this in just a little bit because it can get in there a little bit from the front. Play a little bit of a balancing act here and see if I can't get this thing in. There's the beginnings. So now what I have is a square blank that is pretty much 1.25 inches by 1.25 inches. I've got a little, I don't know, fixture, I guess, that basically has two 45s cut in it to hold it at an angle. If you haven't already guessed, is basically turn this into an octagon. And I'm going to do it faster than that. So I just did 20 there, and I'm going to do 20 on the other 4, and then kind of keep going around from there. That just helps keep things a little bit more even since I'm doing it by hand. And now I'm just switching to a different plane that's set a lot finer so that I can make sure I don't have any tear out when I get to the last part. The last little bit is on the flats that I had from where it was rough cut. Since I hadn't cleaned those up yet, there's still some bandsaw marks on them. Roughly octagonalized. All right, so here we are at the lathe. I'm just going to get some stuff marked out here quick. So now we are going to turn our handle. All right, so what I was just doing there is I have these little brass ferrules, and that's going to go on the end of it to help prevent things from splitting. So I was just cutting that to the right size to fit in there. So now what I've got is the drill chuck with a drill bit. Can't remember what size. I think it's around 1/8 inch or maybe 3/16. And I marked out center on our handle. And I am just going to drill a hole about 2 inches deep, which is about there. This is where I wish I would have gotten a pull version of this Planemaker's float, but it's push version, and it's a roughly 1/8 of an inch, so that should fit in widthwise. And now I'm just basically going to turn our round-ish hole into a rectangle. Almost there on the end, so that's a good sign, but we just got to keep going. We're getting there. I have a feeling that'll be it once I drive that thing home. So let's get that ferrule polished up a little bit, get it to match the back a little bit better, and then I think I will be ready to drive that thing home. Used some gray Scotch-Brite after the shellac to buff it out. Nice and smooth, really like that. Feels good, looks good. So now I'm going to use hide glue, which might sound odd. Why wouldn't I use epoxy? Well, the reason that I'm going to use the hide glue is because just in case something happens, I can warm it up again and it'll kind of loosen up and let go. And everything fits pretty well, so I don't think I'm going to need a whole lot of mechanical holding power that the hide glue can't provide. So we'll see. That's what I'm going to try and do anyway. Just going to go around the rim here and I'll brush it on a little bit, and that'll be good enough for the ferrule. Straight down the handle, so everything is looking good. That is glued together, and we will let that dry for a while and get back to it later. I'm going to go ahead and get the saw plate ready. And first thing I'm going to do is joint, just to make sure that these things are all in a straight line. Even though I just retoothed it and it should be pretty good, you always joint them anyway, just in case. There's shiny spots across all of them, so they look pretty good. First thing I'm doing here is just shaping the teeth. The punch doesn't have a perfectly square corner. It doesn't come to a very good point, so there's a little bit of a round. So it does have teeth, but they're not quite shaped all the way down. Looks more like a scroll saw blade if you've ever looked at a scroll saw blade. But anyway, I am going to start working on this. All right, so that's the first roughly inch. And I'm going to set this thing for 0 now. All right, and I'm going to shape the rest of the way through. All right, so now that I've shaped the teeth, I'm going to set the teeth, and then we'll come back through and sharpen it, which is going to look an awful lot like shaping, so we'll see if I bring you along or not. All right, so there is our finished Gents saw, and if you were paying attention in the video and following along, you would know that it's an 8-inch long plate, but the overall length is pretty close to 14.5, about 14 5/8 total. So obviously that's what, 6.5-ish handle. I've never seen one with a London pattern handle, so that was kind of part of why I wanted to try it out. And for those of you unfamiliar, this is kind of the traditional London pattern style. At least over here in the US, this is what we call London pattern. I know what they call it over there, but I'm pretty happy with that. The size of it worked out great. I did kind of measure my hand and try to figure out what might actually work, but the thing that I like about it is that it's got the flat oriented on the top. So there's flats top and bottom, left and right, but then there's also these on the 45-degree angles. Usually I'm twisted about 45 degrees around the tote, or the handle, I guess, in this case. And so kind of the index finger, that ball joint ends up on this flat, and the rest of them ends up on this one. And then my thumb is on here. So I get a really good grip out of it, and it's really comfortable. So I'm just able to kind of hold it. I really like it. I'm not huge on Gents saws for the most part. I don't often use one. I have a Crown. So this was my old Gents saw, which I don't know if I'll keep it. Maybe I'll end up letting my son use it or something. I don't know. But now I've got a nice one with a London pattern handle to go with it. As always, I appreciate those of you that stuck around this long. If you would care to hit that notification bell, I would much appreciate it. But I will catch you in the next one.